Two police officers burst into an extravagant gala, their authoritative presence cutting through the lively chatter. Guests in their finest attire freeze in place, all eyes turning toward the commotion. The officers march toward a confident black man standing near the stage. Marcus Bennett, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, smiles warmly at a group of guests before the officers rudely interrupt. "You! Step away from the stage. Hands behind your back," one officer barks, his tone dripping with disdain. A wave of gasps spreads through the grand hall. Marcus, unshaken but surprised, calmly asks, "Officers, may I know why I am being detained?" "Trespassing," the second officer snaps, grabbing Marcus's arm with unnecessary force. Cameras flash, guests whisper furiously, and the tension becomes almost unbearable. Marcus's voice remains steady as he says, "There must be a misunderstanding. I belong here." The officers exchange smug glances. "Not tonight, you don't," one sneers, tightening the handcuffs around his wrists. The murmurs in the crowd grow louder. "Who is this man? What's happening?" Guests whisper, trying to piece together the unfolding drama. What no one, including the officers, realizes yet is the shocking truth about Marcus. A truth that will soon flip the entire narrative, leaving everyone stunned. What would you do in Marcus's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. "Excuse me, sir, you need to stop right now," one officer said loudly, walking quickly toward a tall black man standing near a group of guests. All eyes turned toward the scene. The sound of conversations in the elegant ballroom faded as everyone focused on what was happening. Marcus Carter, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, turned slowly to face the officers. He had just been speaking with a few guests when the loud voice cut through the room. His face remained calm, but his eyes showed confusion. "Officers, is something wrong?" he asked politely. The first officer, clearly irritated, pointed at Marcus. "We've had a report of someone trespassing at this event. That someone is you." The room went silent. People exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to react. Some whispered in confusion. Others pulled out their phones to record. Marcus looked around briefly, noticing the growing attention. "Trespassing?" he repeated. "I don't think that's correct. I am a guest here." The second officer stepped forward, his tone more forceful. "We need you to come with us outside. Now." Marcus took a steady breath and spoke calmly. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I have every right to be here." "You don't belong here," the first officer shot back, his voice cold. He reached out as if to grab Marcus by the arm, but Marcus took a small step back. "I think it would be better if we resolved this without unnecessary action," Marcus said firmly, his voice calm but strong. The guests whispered louder, some visibly uncomfortable. One older woman shook her head while a young man whispered, "This is not right." The second officer frowned, clearly annoyed. "If you don't come willingly, we will make you leave," he said, his voice threatening. But Marcus didn't budge. His posture was composed, his eyes steady. "I am not resisting. I am simply saying you are making a mistake." The tension in the room grew heavier with every second. Phones captured the unfolding scene. Whispers turned into small gasps. The officers exchanged a quick glance before stepping closer to Marcus. As they reached for him, Marcus's quiet strength and calm demeanor only made the situation more intense. The room held its breath. What no one expected was that this moment was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would leave everyone, especially the officers, in complete shock. The officers tightened their stance as Marcus Carter, the tall black man in the tuxedo, stood his ground. The first officer, now visibly irritated, stepped forward. "I'm giving you one last chance to come quietly. Don't make this harder on yourself," he said, his voice laced with authority. Marcus raised his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. "Officers, I understand you believe I'm trespassing, But I assure you, that's not the case. I have every right to be here." The crowd began to shift, murmurs growing louder. A young woman whispered to her friend, "Why are they treating him like this? He looks so composed." An older man muttered, "They should at least ask questions before jumping to conclusions." The first officer, however, wasn't interested in explanations. He reached for his handcuffs. "Enough talking," he said sharply. He grabbed Marcus's arm roughly, pulling it behind his back. The second officer moved in to assist, their movements abrupt and harsh. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "This is wrong," someone said loudly. Phones were raised higher, capturing every moment. Despite the humiliating situation, Marcus remained calm. "Officers, I'm not resisting," he said firmly. "But this is a mistake, and you'll soon see that." As the officers moved to lead Marcus out of the room, a woman in a sleek red gown stepped forward. Her voice was sharp and clear. "What is going on here?" she demanded. Her boldness caused the officers to pause momentarily. "This man is a respected guest. What gives you the right to treat him this way?" The first officer turned to the woman, his face flushed with irritation. "Ma'am, please stay out of this. This man is trespassing, and we're handling the situation." The woman crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "Did you even check to see who he is?" she challenged. Her voice carried authority, and her presence seemed to embolden others in the crowd. A few people nodded in agreement, their murmurs growing louder. The officers exchanged glances, clearly annoyed but unwilling to let go of their assumptions. "We received a report of a suspicious individual," the second officer said defensively. "He matches the description." Marcus looked directly at the second officer. "What description is that?" he asked calmly. His question hung in the air, making the officer shift uncomfortably. The first officer, however, didn't waver. "You don't need to ask questions, just comply," he snapped. The woman in red wasn't finished. She gestured toward Marcus. "Do you even realize who you're dealing with?" she asked. Her tone carried a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "This man is—" Before she could finish, a voice boomed from the back of the room. "What is going on here?" All heads turned as a distinguished older man in a tailored suit stepped into the room. His commanding presence silenced the crowd instantly. The officers froze, their grip on Marcus loosening slightly. The man's sharp eyes scanned the scene, and when they landed on Marcus, his expression softened. "Mr. Carter," the man said warmly, stepping closer. "Are you all right?" The officers exchanged panicked glances. "Do you know him?" the first officer asked, his tone hesitant for the first time. The man turned to the officers, his gaze hardening. "Know him? He's the host of this gala," he said firmly. "This event wouldn't even exist without him." A collective gasp swept through the crowd, followed by stunned silence. The officers' faces turned pale as they realized the gravity of their mistake. The first officer stammered, We didn't know." Marcus, still composed despite the ordeal, looked directly at the officers. "Perhaps next time you'll think twice before making assumptions," he said calmly. The crowd erupted into murmurs, their disapproval of the officers' actions clear. The woman in red stepped closer to Marcus. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded. "I'm fine, but this situation could have gone differently if I wasn't who I am." The older man addressed the officers again, his voice cold. "Apologize." Now, the officers stumbled over their words, their earlier arrogance replaced by regret. "We're sorry," the first officer muttered, avoiding Marcus's gaze. The scene had shifted entirely. Marcus's calm strength, the support from the crowd, and the intervention of the older man had turned a humiliating moment into a powerful statement against prejudice. The room was buzzing as the situation reached its peak. Marcus Carter, now standing with handcuffs loosely dangling from his wrist, looked directly at the two officers who had arrested him. His calm demeanor remained unshaken, but his voice was clear and resolute. "You've made a grave mistake," he said firmly, his eyes piercing through their defensive expressions. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as more people began to step forward, voicing their displeasure at the officer's actions. "This is disgraceful," someone muttered. "They didn't even check who he was," another guest exclaimed. The weight of the moment was palpable, with many of the attendees clearly torn between shock and outrage. One officer, still unwilling to back down completely, spoke up defensively. "We were just doing our job," he said, his tone faltering. "We received a report about a suspicious individual who fit the description." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his calm exterior masking the storm of emotions beneath. "And what exactly is that description?" he asked pointedly. His question was met with silence, as the officer fumbled for an answer. Before the conversation could escalate further, a commanding voice cut through the tension. "Unhand him immediately." The room turned toward the source of the voice. It was the Gala organizer, a tall man in his 60s with an air of authority that demanded respect. His tailored suit and confident stride made it clear he was no ordinary guest. As he walked closer, the officer's postures stiffened, realizing this man held significant sway. "I said, let him go," the man repeated, his tone colder now. The first officer hesitated but eventually released the handcuffs with a reluctant click. Marcus rubbed his wrists briefly, but his gaze never left the officers. The organizer turned to Marcus and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Carter, I am so sorry this happened to you," he said sincerely. "This is not how we treat our guests, especially not the host of this event." The revelation sent a wave of shock through the room. Gasps echoed as the guests realized what had just unfolded. "He's the host?" someone whispered in disbelief. How could they not know? The first officer's face turned pale and he struggled to find the words. We didn't know, sir. We were told." The organizer cut him off with a glare. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to ask. You assumed." His voice was sharp, carrying the weight of his disappointment. "And in doing so, you humiliated one of the most respected men in this community." Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady and deliberate. "You had every opportunity to ask me who I was. Instead, you chose to assume. That assumption says more about you than it does about me." The crowd erupted into murmurs again, this time with a mix of anger and support for Marcus. The woman in red from earlier stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "This is exactly why we need accountability," she said loudly. "This kind of behavior cannot continue." The organizer nodded in agreement. "You owe Mr. Carter an apology," he said firmly, directing his words at the officers. Their earlier arrogance was now replaced with visible regret. "We're sorry," the first officer muttered, barely audible. The second officer quickly followed suit, his eyes avoiding Marcus's gaze. Marcus accepted their apology with a slight nod, but didn't let them off the hook easily. "An apology is a start," he said, his tone measured. "But actions speak louder than words. The next time you encounter someone who doesn't look like you, I hope you'll think twice before jumping to conclusions." The organizer stepped in again, addressing the room as much as the officers. "This moment is a reminder of the work we all have to do. Let's not forget it." The crowd began to clap, a slow ripple that grew louder as people showed their support for Marcus. The officers, now thoroughly humbled, quietly left the room. The organizer turned back to Marcus with an apologetic smile. "Let's get this gala back on track," he said warmly. "You deserve to be celebrated tonight." Marcus nodded, his composure intact despite the ordeal. As the music resumed and the event regained its rhythm, Marcus's quiet strength left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed the confrontation. The air in the gala room remained tense, as Marcus Carter, now free from the handcuffs, stood tall in the center. The murmurs of the guests buzzed around him, but his focus remained steady. His composed demeanor carried an authority that needed no announcement, but the gravity of the situation demanded more. The organizer, Mr. William Grant, turned to the officers with an authoritative tone. "You've made a mistake that I hope you're ready to rectify," he began. "Do you even realize who you've just humiliated?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado now replaced with a mix of confusion and dread. "We were acting on a report, sir," one of them stammered. "We didn't mean—" "Enough!" Mr. Grant interrupted sharply. "Your actions were reckless and based entirely on assumptions. Marcus Carter isn't just a guest at this gala. He's the host, the man who made tonight possible." Gasps rippled through the crowd, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief. Whispers spread like wildfire. "He's the host?" a woman in a glittering gown muttered. "How could they not know?" Marcus, finally breaking his silence, addressed the room with a calm but commanding voice. "It's not about who I am," he said. "It's about the choices made here tonight, choices rooted in prejudice, assumptions, and a lack of basic human decency." His words carried a weight that silenced the room entirely. The officers stood frozen, their earlier arrogance crumbling as the truth set in. "We didn't know," one of them muttered, barely audible. "And that," Marcus replied, his tone unwavering, "is exactly the problem." The atmosphere shifted as guests stepped forward, their voices rising in support of Marcus. "This is unacceptable," a man in a navy suit exclaimed. "We cannot allow this kind of behavior to go unchecked." The officers, visibly shaken, turned to Mr. Grant for guidance. "We're sorry, sir," one of them began, but Marcus raised a hand to stop him. "An apology without change is meaningless," Marcus said firmly. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who has been judged, dismissed, or mistreated because of how they look." The crowd erupted in applause, their support echoing through the grand hall. Marcus's presence had shifted the energy of the room entirely, turning what began as a moment of humiliation into a powerful lesson. Mr. Grant, seizing the opportunity, addressed the guests. "Tonight is a reminder that we must hold ourselves and each other accountable. Let this serve as a moment of reflection for all of us." He turned to Marcus with a sincere expression. "Mr. Carter, I cannot apologize enough for what has happened. You've handled this with a grace and strength that inspires us all." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady but forgiving. "It's not just about apologies," he said. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen again." The officers, humbled and remorseful, nodded in agreement. "We'll do better," one of them promised, though his voice was faint. "See that you do," Marcus replied. "Not for me, but for every person you encounter in the future." As the music resumed and the crowd began to relax, the focus of the evening shifted back to celebration. Marcus, now surrounded by supportive guests, became the centerpiece of the event for reasons far beyond his role as the host. In that moment, Marcus's strength, wisdom, and unshakable integrity turned an act of injustice into a transformative experience for everyone present. The events of the evening quickly spread beyond the confines of the gala. Guests shared videos and stories on social media, painting a vivid picture of the injustice Marcus Carter had endured and the grace with which he had responded. The footage of the officers' actions and Marcus's composed rebuttal ignited a firestorm of reactions. Within hours, the hashtags #Justice for Marcus and #Prejudice at the gala began trending worldwide. Comments poured in from people across the globe, expressing outrage over the racial profiling and applauding Marcus's poise. "He handled it like a true leader," one comment read. "This is how change begins." News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting clips of Marcus's powerful words. Reporters highlighted the broader issue of systemic bias, using the Gala incident as a catalyst for national conversations. Marcus's phone rang incessantly with interview requests, support from community leaders, and messages from ordinary people inspired by his stand. Back at the gala, Mr. William Grant held a press conference to address the incident. Standing alongside Marcus, he acknowledged the gravity of the situation. "What happened here tonight was unacceptable," Grant began. "We failed to create a safe and inclusive space, and for that, we take full responsibility." Marcus stepped forward to speak, his voice calm, yet resolute. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about every person who has faced judgment and discrimination based on stereotypes. We must do better, not with empty promises but with real actions." The crowd outside the venue erupted into applause, their cheers echoing in support of Marcus's call for change. The officers who had detained Marcus stood to the side, their heads lowered in visible remorse. When asked to speak, one officer stepped forward hesitantly. "We made a mistake," he admitted. "We acted on assumptions instead of facts, and for that, we are deeply sorry." Marcus met the officer's gaze. "Acknowledging the mistake is a start," he said, "but what matters is what you do next. Use this as a lesson to treat every person with the dignity they deserve." The officer nodded, his face a mix of guilt and determination. "We will," he promised. In the following days, the police department launched an internal review, and the officers involved were placed on administrative leave. Community leaders organized workshops on implicit bias, inviting Marcus to speak as a guest of honor. His message was clear. Progress comes not from punishment, but from education and accountability. The Gala incident became a turning point, sparking widespread discussions on racial prejudice in law enforcement and society at large. Marcus used the platform to amplify voices that often went unheard, collaborating with activists and policymakers to advocate for systemic reform. As the dust settled, Marcus returned to his everyday life, though his impact continued to ripple far and wide. Letters of gratitude flooded his inbox, from teenagers inspired to speak out against injustice to parents who saw him as a role model for their children. At the next gala, Marcus was celebrated not only as a host, but as a symbol of resilience and change. The event was dedicated to promoting equality, featuring diverse voices and stories that highlighted the importance of inclusion. Marcus's presence reminded everyone that one moment of courage could inspire a movement. As the days passed, the incident at the gala evolved into more than just a viral news story. It became a lesson in humility, redemption, and the importance of change. Marcus Carter's response to the situation showcased his wisdom and ability to lead with empathy, turning a personal injustice into a teaching moment for all involved. The two officers involved, Officer Smith and Officer Daniels, found themselves at the center of a public outcry. Though initially defensive, they began to reflect on their actions. "We acted out of ignorance and prejudice," Daniels admitted in a heartfelt apology aired on local news. "That night taught me how destructive assumptions can be." Marcus agreed to meet with the officers, not out of obligation, but because he believed in the power of dialogue. The conversation was raw, honest, and filled with emotion. Smith expressed his regret. "I see now how deeply I hurt you and the community. I want to do better." Marcus listened patiently before responding. "Acknowledging your mistake is the first step," he said. "Now, it's about what you do to ensure this doesn't happen again, not just for me, but for anyone else who faces unfair treatment." Inspired by the interaction, the officers volunteered to participate in workshops on racial bias, hosted by Marcus and local community leaders. These sessions became an essential step toward bridging gaps and fostering understanding. During one session, Daniel shared, "I've learned more in these weeks than I ever thought possible. It's not just about what we see, but how we choose to interpret it." The gala's host, William Grant, also took significant steps to rectify the damage. He announced a partnership with Marcus to create a foundation aimed at combating racial bias and promoting diversity. The foundation, aptly named the Marcus Initiative, focused on training law enforcement, educating youth, and funding programs that built bridges between different communities. Meanwhile, Marcus's message spread far beyond the gala and the officers involved. He was invited to speak at universities, community centers, and corporate events. His story became a powerful reminder that resilience and grace could turn even the harshest challenges into opportunities for growth. "This isn't about blame," Marcus said during a speech. "It's about responsibility. We all have a role to play in creating a better world." The story also transformed the gala itself. The following year's event was rebranded as the Unity Gala, celebrating diversity and inclusion. The guest list reflected a broader spectrum of voices and talents, and the evening was dedicated to showcasing stories of overcoming prejudice and fostering unity. For Marcus, the incident marked a new chapter in his life. Though he had always been a leader in his professional field, this experience showed him the power of his voice in driving societal change. He often reflected on the moment he stood in the spotlight, not as a victim, but as a catalyst for progress. "I don't hold anger toward those officers," Marcus shared during an interview. "Anger is easy. What's hard is turning that anger into something productive, something that lasts." The officers, too, began to forge a new path. They became advocates for change within their department, pushing for mandatory bias training and community engagement programs. Their transformation wasn't immediate, but it was genuine, rooted in the lessons they learned from their mistake. As for the broader community, Marcus's story continued to inspire. Schools incorporated discussions on prejudice and equality into their curriculums. Parents used the incident to teach their children about empathy and standing up for what is right. And for those who watched from a distance, Marcus's actions reminded them that dignity and courage could transcend even the most challenging circumstances. The gala incident, once a source of embarrassment and pain, became a beacon of hope. It demonstrated that while prejudice still existed, so did the capacity for growth, understanding, and redemption. Marcus often ended his speeches with the same message: change starts with us. One step, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time. Through his unwavering resolve, Marcus Carter turned a night of humiliation into a movement that would echo for years to come. His journey showed the world that even in the face of adversity, progress was possible when people chose to rise above their differences and work toward a common good. The incident at the gala left a lasting impression on everyone involved. As the dust settled, Marcus Carter stood as a symbol of resilience and leadership, his story serving as a powerful reminder of how one individual could inspire change. Marcus reflected on the night's events with a sense of purpose rather than anger. "That moment wasn't just about me," he said in an interview. "It was about all the people who faced similar injustices but didn't have the chance to speak up or be heard. I want to use my voice for them." The lessons learned extended beyond the gala. The officers, now more aware of their biases, vowed to take their experience as a turning point. They participated in several community-building initiatives, openly sharing their journey of redemption. "We messed up," Officer Daniels admitted. "But this has been an opportunity to grow, to understand, and to make things right." Marcus's newly launched foundation, the Marcus Initiative, became a driving force for change. It worked closely with law enforcement agencies, schools, and businesses to promote inclusivity and foster understanding. Programs under the initiative provided workshops, educational resources, and funding for diversity-focused projects. The foundation became a beacon of hope for communities grappling with division and prejudice. The gala's transformation into the Unity Gala marked a significant milestone. The event, now an annual celebration, honored individuals and organizations working to bridge divides and create a more equitable society. Each year, the gala featured stories of perseverance and progress, amplifying voices that had been silenced for too long. Marcus's story also inspired everyday people. Parents shared his journey with their children, teaching them the importance of empathy and standing against injustice. Schools held discussions on the incident, using it as a case study to foster understanding and respect among students. Social media buzzed with hashtags celebrating Marcus's courage, turning what began as a moment of humiliation into a movement of empowerment. In a heartfelt statement at a press conference, Marcus addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about one night or one person. It's about all of us realizing our potential to do better, to be better. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with each of us taking small steps toward understanding and compassion." The story's ripple effect was undeniable. Donations to the Marcus Initiative poured in, allowing it to expand its reach across the nation. Communities once divided found common ground, and conversations about bias and equality became more frequent and impactful. As for Marcus, the experience deepened his resolve to make a difference. He continued to balance his professional life with his newfound mission, speaking at conferences, mentoring young leaders, and driving initiatives for systemic change. His humility and determination resonated with everyone who heard his story. For the officers, the path of redemption was not easy, but it was transformative. Their willingness to acknowledge their mistakes and take responsibility set a precedent within their department. Policies began to change, and mandatory training on racial sensitivity became a standard practice. The world moved forward, but the story of Marcus Carter remained a cornerstone for those who sought to make it better. It reminded everyone that even in moments of adversity, there was an opportunity to rise, to inspire, and to pave the way for a brighter future. What would you do in a situation like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.